Welcome to today's presentation, The National Urban League and New York City Tenants, presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, whose mission is to honor anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery and the legacy of that struggle, and strive to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. Throughout American history, Black Americans have united to help their community members survive under difficult circumstances. The National Urban League is an example of one such organization that united several different organizations with the aim to help Black communities survive and thrive in new urban centers. Founded in 1911 under the name National League on Urban Conditions Among Blacks, and changing its name to the National Urban League in 1920, the organization's mission was to, quote, enable African Americans to secure economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. Their mission statement today adds, quote, the League promotes economic empowerment through education and job training, housing and community development, workforce development, entrepreneurship, health and quality of life, end quote. Today, the organization is still active with over 90 affiliated chapters across 37 states and D.C. The National Urban League was a combination of three different organizations founded around the same era: the Committee for the Improvement of Industrial Conditions Among Blacks, the National League for the Protection of Colored Women, and the Committee on Urban Conditions Among Blacks. Just by looking at the organization's names, we understand that these groupings were created to help Black Americans advance economically and socially by providing them with services in education, healthcare, housing, and jobs. From its onset, it was an interracial organization, having been established by George Edmund Haynes, the first Black PhD graduate of Columbia University, and Ruth Standish Baldwin, a white philanthropist from New York City. Beginning in 1910, the first wave of the Great Migration had ensued. From 1910 to 1970, around 6 million Black Americans moved from the American South to the North, seeking employment opportunities and more freedoms in cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit. This influx of migrants to northern cities meant that many people were struggling with finding jobs and housing in cities that they were unfamiliar with. The National Urban League gave counsel to migrants moving into urban centers, helping them acquire jobs, housing, and educational opportunities. Additionally, many northern cities, though not having as restrictive laws as the Jim Crow laws in the South, also discriminated against Black individuals. For example, Black Americans in cities like Chicago and New York often faced redlining, a practice by which Black Americans were denied financial services, like house loans, and therefore could not afford to purchase houses in more affluent neighborhoods. This practice effectively segregated housing in cities. Additionally, tenants often faced race-restrictive covenants. This practice restricted Black Americans from buying homes in all-white neighborhoods, as it prohibited whites from selling or leasing property to a particular group of people, mostly Blacks. In Chicago, such practices led to the creation of a section of the city that would be known as the Black Belt. Migrants moving to the north during the first and second waves of the Great Migration were relegated to the Black Belt area, which was typically lower income and offered lesser quality housing. People often lived in crowded buildings where multiple families would crowd into small apartments. When they tried to move out, they found themselves unable to afford better housing or receiving loans to purchase it. It was a similar story in New York City, where Black Americans were constrained to areas of the city like Harlem. The National Urban League helped these individuals find housing and employment in order to afford better housing. In addition to these community-centered services, the League has had an extraordinary list of leaders who have transformed the organization and the work it has championed, extending its work to the civil rights movement. Under the leadership of Lester Granger, who began his leadership in 1941, the League supported the 1941 March on Washington to add the League's voice to those pushing back against the exclusion of Black soldiers from World War II. Granger joined A. Philip Randolph, Martin Luther King, and Roy Wilkins at a meeting with Dwight D. Eisenhower to push for the enforcement of the 1957 Civil Rights Act and the right to vote. Under the leadership of Whitney M. Young, who began his leadership in 1961, the organization supported the civil rights movement by hosting meetings with civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and others as they planned events like the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom at its headquarters in New York City. Young also started community initiatives such as Street Academy to assist high school dropouts in getting into colleges, and New Thrust, a program that enabled Black community leaders to identify and propose solutions for local community-centered problems. Under the leadership of Vernon E. Jordan Jr., beginning in 1971, the League became even more involved in wider national-level issues, such as environmental protection, energy conservation, and poverty. Therefore, the League was not only focused on its local communities, where its chapters were located, but quickly took up the mantle of civil rights and nationwide social, environmental, and political ills. In total, as the oldest and largest community-based organization in the U.S., the National Urban League has helped millions of people adjust to their new lives and stands as a testament to what community organizing can achieve. Thank you for attending today's presentation. Please help us by completing a brief survey at the link on your screen and also in the video description. Your feedback will help NAHOF receive funding and help plan future projects. Additionally, please contact NAHOF with any questions or comments, or if you're interested in learning more about the organization. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and we hope to see you at our next presentation. Thank you.